Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to another session of Economy Explained. 2 days ago, National Sample Survey Office published findings of a survey which is known as Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. In short, we'll refer to this as HCES. And since then, there's been a lot of discussion regarding what is the survey all about, what are the implications of this survey, and most importantly, for civil services, what is the area that you're supposed to be focused on in this survey? Let's understand all of them. But before that, a very important announcement. We have decided to launch an online classroom program for the evening batch starting from February 28th, 2024. And these classes will be held every weekday, that is from Monday to Saturday evening 6 p.m. And not just that, if you're interested, we are also running a flat 50% discount now. And along with that, we are also going to provide you with 6 months extension of the program. So if you're interested, please check out the details, or for more details, get in touch with this contact number. Let's begin the discussion. What are the basic concepts that you are supposed to understand? Point number one, as already mentioned, the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey HECS is published by NSSO. Some of you will basically say, but sir, I read in a book. It was not NSSO, it was mentioned as NSO. My dear, earlier it was NSO. We have taken two organizations, NSO and CSO. The new organization is NSSO, National Sample Survey Office. Point number two, until couple of decades ago, the consumption expenditure surveys were published annually. For every year, the consumption expenditure surveys were published. But after, please remember the number, after the 26th survey, rather than doing this annually, we shifted it to once every 5 years. Once every 5 years, quinquennially. They'll use a term quinquennially, which basically means rather than 1 year, or rather than providing this data once every year, we shifted providing this data once every 5 years. Third point, the last data for which last survey for which the data is available in the public domain was conducted for the year 2011 and 2012. Some of you will basically ask me, sir, before this you told us that it is done once every 5 years, but now you are telling me that the last survey for which the data is available in the public domain is 2011 and 2012, which means for more than 10 years no survey was conducted. It is slightly technical, please understand this. After 2011 and 2012, the survey was conducted for the year 16 and 17. The survey was conducted, but the findings of it were not made public. Government of India stated that there are certain issues. Government has certain concerns regarding methodological issues of the survey. And that is the reason, because it says they have certain doubts over the methodologies followed in the survey. The data for this was not made public. Although after government announced that the data will not be made public, there was a leaked data available for the survey. But is it important for civil services? Absolutely no. Do not waste your time. Point number four. Sir, why is the survey so important? Why am I saying that? In the Hindu newspaper, headlines is on survey. If I open the news channel, there is a discussion on the survey. So why is the survey so important? Point number one, please understand this. In this survey, throughout India, we are going to identify certain sample of households. Certain number of households will be identified. And from these households, a survey data is collected. That is, out of these households, how much income they are earning, out of which how much money they are spending on food items, how much money they are spending on the non-food items. Very simple. How much money on food items and how much money on the non-food items. A survey is conducted and the data is collected. This is basically the collection of data that is done under the consumption expenditure surveys. Now next, why is it so important then? If I collect the data, why is it so important? I'll give a very simple example. Every now and then you'll come across a concept called as inflation. I'm pretty sure all of you have come across the idea of inflation. What is inflation? In a nutshell, it represents how much is the price levels for a basket of commodities is increasing. By how much percentage compared to a base year or a base time period, by how much percentage the price levels have changed. That measurement is called as inflation. And specifically within inflation, let me focus on retail inflation. Let me be focused on retail inflation. In simple terms, CPI. CPI is nothing but retail inflation. Now, in case of retail inflation, what we do is we will give weightages to different commodities. For example, there are 6 groups within CPI. Out of these 6 groups, the most important one is food and beverages. The most important one is food and beverages. And for food and beverages, the weightage that is given will vary. Right? In certain regions, we'll provide the weightage of 36%. In certain regions, we'll provide it in the range of 54%. That is rural and urban. And in case of overall India, my focus will be on overall India. For overall India, the weightage that is given for food and beverages, I'm just rounding off the number, is around 46%. The weightage given is around 46%. Now, what is the importance of the weightage? 46% weightage basically means on an average, households are spending so much amount of money on these commodities. I hope you understand this. 46% simply represents a weightage, that is importance given to the household consumption expenditure on these commodities. So having a weightage gives a very good idea. If prices of these commodities will change, then what is the impact on the household? Now question is, how do you identify which commodity should be given how much weightage? That is done by taking into consideration the data that is published under household consumption expenditure surveys. And that is the reason I said whenever the HCES data is published, they will publish how much expenditure is done on food items, how much is done on non-food items. So come back to the next point now. So the last survey for which the data was available is 2011 and 2012. So Government of India announced that we will conduct one more survey for 22 and 23, and using this data we will publish the household consumption expenditure survey observations. Now, what are the observations? What are the findings of the latest survey which has been published after a gap of 11 years? These are certain important points. Make the observations. Point number 1, the average monthly per capita expenditure. Average monthly per capita expenditure. In short, this is referred to as MPCE. Average monthly per capita expenditure. MPCE. MPCE for rural India and urban India has increased compared to what was the observation, what was the data back in the year 2010 and 11. So for 2010 and 11, it was 1430 rupees for rural India. For urban India, it was 2630 rupees. And now, as per the latest data, 22 and 23, this has increased to 3773 rupees for rural India and 6459 rupees for urban India. Now, many of you will have this doubt. So, should we remember all of this data? Should we remember all of this data? I don't think so. UPSC will go to the extent of asking what is the exact number of MPCE for rural India and urban India. But any case, just to be on a safer side, I would recommend that please remember the latest data. At least the latest data you please remember. But what is the observation? Observation is monthly per capita expenditures in the last 1 decade have increased. What is the importance of it? You will understand in a minute. Have patience. Point number 2, I said whatever per capita expenditure that we incur, per capita means per person, whatever per capita expenditure that we incur, generally it is divided into food expenditure as well as non-food expenditure. So what is the inference? What does the data say? Basically, it says back in the year 11 and 12, in rural India, 53%, I'm rounding off the number, 53% of the expenditure was done on, right, basically the food expenditure in rural India. This has come down to 46.4%. Now, some of you will basically say, sir, if it has come down, does it mean that in rural India, people are spending less money on the food? Not necessarily. Please understand the inference very carefully. It was 53% out of 1430 rupees. Now it is 46% out of 3773 rupees. So in absolute values, in absolute rupee terms, expenditure has increased. But as a proportion, as a percentage of the total expenditure, it has actually decreased. Which also means, remember one more point, which also means the expenditure of households, not only in rural India, but also in urban India. Is it okay? Can I make an inference here? That is, out of the total expenditure now, households in rural India as well as urban India, they are spending more money on non-food items. Is it okay? They are spending more money as a proportion of their expenditure on non-food items. Does it have any implication? Please understand this. This question was asked in the UPSC preliminary examination many years ago. There is one law called as Angel's Law. There is one law called as Angel's Law. What does the Angel's Law basically state? It states that whenever person's income increases, please remember this, in the context of the survey, this becomes very important now. As the person's income keeps on increasing, the person's absolute expenditure, what do you mean by absolute expenditure? In rupee terms, the absolute expenditure on the food increases, but the proportionate expenditure on food will keep on decreasing. Proportionate simply means what is the total expenditure out of total income, that is total expenditure on food divided by total income. So absolute expenditure keeps on increasing, but the percentage expenditure keeps on decreasing. Proportionate expenditure keeps on decreasing. That is exactly what you will see in this example here. That is exactly what you are observing. No doubt, rural India as well as urban India, no doubt, as a percentage of total expenditure on food, the percentages have come down. But that doesn't mean that they are spending lesser money on the food. It simply means absolute number of rupees expenditure is higher, but as a percentage of total income, the percentage will become lower. So please remember the Angel's Law. Suddenly it can be asked in the UPSC prelims now. Now apart from this, right, please understand there is one more very important point to note. There is something called as imputed value of certain social welfare programs. What do you mean by imputed value here? Let's say I am one of the beneficiaries of certain social welfare programs of Government of India. For example, I'm getting free education. I'm also getting free food grains as well as, let's say, free healthcare facility. So if these kind of facilities were not provided, I repeat, if these kind of facilities were not provided, I would have spent more money out of my pocket for getting these facilities. But now because government is giving these facilities to me, I will not be spending money on these facilities. And because I'm not spending money, when the survey is conducted, when they will ask the data from me, I will not be giving the data of this kind of a imputed value of expenditure. Imputed means, right, basically you're considering these kind of social welfare expenditure facilities or social welfare facilities which are given by the government on which the beneficiary does not spend money. Just to make it much more clear, let's say you are the person who has come to me for collecting data. I will say I've spent, let's say, 500 rupees, right? I've spent 500 rupees this month on food as well as non-food. But if imagine Government of India had not provided healthcare facility for me free of a cost, I would have spent 500 rupees plus another 100 rupees on healthcare. If education was not provided free of a cost, I would have spent another 100 rupee on education. So total expenditure should have been 700. But because government is providing these social welfare facilities for me, I will give the data of only 500. So imputed value, right? Have a look at this imputed value of monthly per capita expenditure after including all these kinds of welfare programs which are provided by the government will be much higher compared to the actual data which has been published without including these kind of expenditures, which means make two very important observations here. Point number one, if you come across the data 3,773 rupees, that is the MPCE for rural India, it doesn't include the social welfare expenses, right, which are actually incurred by the government, not by the beneficiaries. And point number two, when you come across in the newspaper, it is 3,773 rupees. Is it at current market prices or is it at the base year prices? Please make a note of this. This is at current market prices. The 3773 for rural India and 6459 for urban India, it is at current market prices, not at base year prices. So please remember this very carefully. This is another very important observation. Next, what has happened to the food expenditure in both urban India and rural India compared to the previous decades? You will make an observation. Please do that. 99-2000, out of the total expenditure, 59% of the expenditure was done on food. Over a period of time, in rural India, it has come down from 59%, and as per the latest data published by the government, it is 46%. Whereas in case of urban part of India, it was 48% back in the year 99 and 2000. Now, as per the latest data published, it is 39%, which is, again, please understand, some of you might simply ask me, sir, is it any special feature associated with India? Absolutely no. This is commonly observed. For example, United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, UNFAO, very recently has stated that this kind of an outcome has been observed in 28 countries that they have conducted the survey in. So it is nothing special as such. Over a period of time, whenever the incomes keep on increasing, the percentage expenditure, I repeat, the percentage expenditure, right, that we incur on food will automatically keep on coming down. Apart from this, what else you need to make observations in this report? It is average monthly per capita expenditure, share of food as well as non-food items in absolute rupees. In absolute rupees, just make an observation, do not by heart anything. Now, apart from this, one more point of data. This is important. The rural-urban gap. The rural-urban gap. That is how much is the gap between the consumption patterns or consumption expenditures of rural and urban. Right? It was around 91%. It hit the peak of around 91% back in the survey for the year 2004 and 2005. Now, it has actually come down to 71%. You can just look at the data and you will realize it. It has come down to around 71%. That is the difference between the expenditure done in rural India and urban India. It has come down to 71% as of now. Now, what is the importance? Let's focus on how do you understand all of this data. For example, the CEO of Niti Aayog has given these kind of summations based on the data. Point number one, the CEO says, again, just make observations. The CEO says, one, the growth in India has been broad-based. The growth in India has been broad-based, meaning what? It is not just that incomes in urban part of India are increasing, right? Because of higher growth, it's not just concentrated in urban India, even in rural India, the incomes have increased. That's the first point. Point number two, if you look at the data, although this might become a lot of a contentious issue in the coming days, the CEO of Niti Aayog says that if you look at this particular data, the poverty numbers in India, he says, are less than 5%. The poverty rates in India are less than 5%. Now you will ask me a question, sir, on what basis is he making that assumption? On what basis is he coming to this particular conclusion? Simple data. The argument is that if you look at the, let's say, Rangarajan committee recommended a poverty line of 32 rupees. Rangarajan committee recommended a poverty line of 32 rupees. Now that was for the year 2011 and 2012. If you basically drag it down means extrapolate. Of course, just to be very clear here, it was 32 rupees for rural India and 47 rupees for urban India. But let's say, if you just extrapolate this, adjust it for inflation, the argument is it could become somewhere around 60 rupees now. It could become somewhere around 60 rupees. Now, what is the use of it? If it is 60 rupees, right, let's say per person, right, and if you multiply it by 30, this will become somewhere around 1800 rupees. And the lowest 5% of the population, as per this data, as per this survey, the lowest 5% of the population is spending 1373 rupees. The lowest 5% of the population spends 1373 rupees. And the next 5% means lowest 5 and above that, that is from 6% to 10%. The next 5% above this, right, basically is spending somewhere around 1750 rupees. So his argument is, if you take the poverty line data for 2011 and 12, adjust it with inflation, multiplied for per month, it will become 1800 rupees. And the latest, the expenditure survey shows that the lowest 10% of the population is is spending at least, is spending 1750 rupees and below that, which means poverty rate in case of India will be much lower. In fact, he goes one step ahead and says, if you include, right, this is without imputed value of social welfare measures. If you include the social welfare expenditure benefit they are getting, this will be much higher than 1373 and this will be much higher than 1750, which now he says, if you compare that with 1800 rupees, which is the below poverty line or the poverty line cutoff, the poverty ratio in India will be much lower. But having said so, please understand, as per the latest Niti Aayog reports multi-dimensional poverty index, 11% of the population falls basically under the category of multi-dimensionally poor. That is the second point. Third very important point. If you calculate these kind of surveys and get the data, this data or this set of data can be used for making the changes for base years for many macroeconomic indicators. For many of these macroeconomic indicators, you can use this data now to change the base year. For example, I told you earlier, for CPI, the base year is 2012 now. 2012 is the base year. So it has been a very long time period. We have the set of data now. Consumption expenditure data is available. It can be used to change the base year for many more macroeconomic indicators. That's a third very important point. Fourth very important point, when you see that the households are spending more money compared to 11 and 12, now in 23, households are spending more money and they are spending more money on the non-food items. I repeat, they are spending more money on the non-food items. Don't you think it simply is an indicator? It is an indicator that households' quality of life is improving, standard of life is improving, and that is also one more use of this kind of surveys which are published by the government. Now, having said so, does it mean that everything is well and good in Indian economy in that case? Looking at this particular data, can we make a sweeping generalization and say the whole part of economy, the whole society as a part of Indian economy is enjoying the benefits of the growth? There are certain concerns, and you please remember these kind of concerns if you want to provide a balanced approach to a mains answer writing. Point number one, no doubt, right? As per the survey, the expenditures of rural households, urban households have increased, no doubt. But having said so, as per various other data sets, even today, 16% of India's population, I repeat, 16% of India's population is undernourished. Point number one. Point number two, no doubt, expenditures have increased on food as well as non-food items. But even today, various data sets show that more than 20% of children below the age group of 5 years. I repeat, more than 20% of the children below the age group of 5 years, these experience wasting. So on one side, we have come across a data which says that household expenditures have increased in the last 1 decade by a huge number. Rural, urban, the gap has come down. This can be used to showcase that poverty should have reduced. Right? The growth is broad-based, etc. But having said so, if you look at many other social indicators, many other social parameters, performance of India needs improvement. So these are the points which I wanted to discuss with you people regarding the latest publication of Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and if you are yet to subscribe to our YouTube channel, kindly do it now. Thank you. Have a great day.